welcome everybody to this 3 NIHR Research Schools Mental Health Programme seminar. And today we've got the pleasure of Tessa Morgan and Jack Smith, who are going to be talking to us about what should emotionally safe co-produced research with lived experience researchers on sensitive topics look like. So I'll hand over to Tessa first.
Yeah, kia ora koutou. Thank you all for taking your lunch break to hear from myself and Jack about our reflections on a co-produced systematic review. As Claire just rightfully pointed out, it's a bit of a mouthful, but we want to think about what should emotionally safe co-produced research with lived experience researchers on sensitive topics look like. And so for the structure of this presentation, I'm going to share findings from our systematic review, and then you're going to hear my lovely colleague Jack Smith his reflections on our systematic review for the last 10 minutes. So I hope that works. So just a bit of a background. There's been a growing emphasis on co-production and co-design with people with lived experience, especially on sensitive topics. There's been a growing focus on the impact of emotionally demanding researchers and strategies to support researchers. There's some really lovely work going on there. But there's actually quite a lot of gaps around how we can support lived experience researchers conducting sensitive research. And we felt this gap really acutely when we were setting up our lived experience group for the Coaches study, which has been a 4-year study funded by NIHR and Foundations Trust, and it's about mental health support for young people with a social worker. And so this is our team, and we'd all been involved in some form of co-production or co-design research, but never to this extent where all of us are fully fledged researchers and forming every aspect of the research project. And so at the start, 3 years ago now, we were looking for a bit of a roadmap to think about how we could set up our group, how we can make sure that it feels safe, how we're protected and empowered as we undertake this journey on topics that are close to our heart and are potentially distressing. And we didn't find anything that really helped us set up the group. So there's obviously some guidelines such as the GRIP2 guidelines, but that felt a bit more like evaluative rather than how do we cultivate in the start. So along with clinical support we got on board, trauma-informed training and some research skills that we undertook as a group. Our main strategy, I guess, was to just meet every Monday for an hour, and we've done that more or less for 3 years and grapple with the research challenges as they come. But then it was an interesting reflection. So when we came to write up some of our findings, such as in this study, the social must be stabilized, we actually wrote out a lot of the emotional demands and challenges of the research. We didn't put it in there, and I don't know if subliminally or whatever that was because we wanted to present our research as rational and well planned, but yeah, it was a really interesting reflection point for us as a group. And I share with you a passage from that article where it says, "We began our critical analysis with one analyst creating a pen portrait of each young person's set of case notes." So that's one line. There's actually a whole backstory to that one single line where as a group, we wanted to feel autonomous. We all wanted to be having a go at independently analysing case notes. And myself as the learned experience researcher on the group, I didn't want to be the kind of gatekeeping any of the knowledge or research. So that's what we tried to do. And we've all of us have had experiences of reading our own case notes, but that didn't actually set us up for actually how sad, distressing some of these case notes was, especially because we were witnessing young people falling through the cracks of mental health services, and we actually just couldn't do anything about it. And I think that was the key reason why we actually felt quite distressed doing it. And in the process. And so we actually decided as a group to take a month to just reset And then with some additional clinical support, we actually changed our research process. So we then decided to shift where one analyst, who's me, would write a really thick description of a case note, and then that would be what we analysed rather than the raw case notes. And so, that's what happened in practice. And then we didn't write that in this, right? But it made us think, how could we have done better? And actually, how can we best share our learnings from this process that we've been so intimately involved in the last 3 years? And that's what brought us to the idea of applying to the NIHR 3 Schools mental health program grant for a project around how we could figure out what is the published literature in this space. So by co-producing a systematic review and then co-producing best practice guidelines so that we can share our learning. And today I'm going to share with you findings from the systematic review. So I just want to draw attention. We've decided to frame our project in the language of emotional safety. So for a few reasons. First, we wanted to reflect how emotions flow through research, relationships, practices, contexts, and generate knowledge. So they're really important. Also, that sensitive research presents threats to security and well-being. So actually, there's a real incentive to make sure that it is safe. We're also really inspired by the emancipatory paradigm of cultural safety, which is championed by Indigenous health researchers and nurses, many of whom are at the University of Auckland, where I had the pleasure of working for 7 years, and was really, swayed by this paradigm, which outlines safety as important pillar of the whole research process. And the first point is to challenge taken for granted knowledge structures. So we need to question why is that lived experience voices, especially from marginalized communities, are afforded a lower status in research that prioritizes rational, objective science. We need to challenge that from its core. Next, those in power, including all learned experience researchers, need to reflect and relinquish some power if we're going to have any hope for this research to be equal. Next, it's important to have opportunities for empowerment. Research isn't it's not just about making sure that there's no harm from the research, but how can we make sure that we're doing good for individuals involved and for our communities. And finally, emotional safety is about the ongoing recognition that inequality will shape unequal access to different emotions in the process, and we need to be aware of this throughout the research journey. So to some of the nuts and bolts of the systematic review, that this is the decision tree that helped guide all of us as we were co-producing the review. So just an overview, studies had to be original research, they had to be concerned with underserved communities and on sensitive topics. They had to be a study where they were co-produced with researchers who were members of an underserved community and or had experiences of a sensitive topic. And then we took these studies to full text to consider how emotional safety or support was outlined in the studies. So this is our Prisma tree. I think as a team it was quite a process. I'm using Ryan to sort through the titles, but we ultimately got to 21 included studies. And just an overview of what was included. So 13 of the studies were focused on mental health, 12 with adults, but 9 with children. In terms of underserved populations, 7 with minoritized, marginalized identities, 5 with mental health again. And then, interestingly, 12 from the UK context. And I think that probably has to do with the funding climate and the emphasis around PPI research in the UK. So from these studies, we then worked together to create themes, which I'm going to present to you. So the first was the importance of empowering paradigms. So every study included in the systematic review acknowledged the need to equalize power dynamics. The 3 most prevalent theoretical frameworks used in these studies was participatory action research, post-colonial theory, a lot about critical consciousness raising, And then a final one that was used in a handful was relational care ethics, and particularly thinking about ethics throughout the process. Interestingly, in the studies, there was acknowledgement that for lived experience researchers to receive training in research methods so that there can be mutual knowledge sharing. So it's not just about researchers learning from lived experience researchers, but it's also lived experience researchers learning like what are the rules of the game of higher education and research. So that seemed to be really important. All included studies referred to some form of emotional demand or potential challenge of conducting the research. One of our colleagues, Fran, had this concept of living, not lived experience, which I think really captured what these studies were talking about, how it's not like lived experience researchers are always coming to this with like the experience is done now. In some cases, it can be like really raw and live and developing and ongoing. And in Van der Bremer, the study recognizes that vulnerability is also not shared equally across the lived experience team. There's acknowledgement that becoming an expert by experience in a research project can actually cause anxiety. That the process can open up unanticipated sources of pain, and by being part of this research, you can be exposed to other people's trauma and distress. There's examples of where this is well handled. This being part of this research can lead to joy and empowerment. Only one study really explicitly talked about how if it's handled poorly by learned experience researchers, it can lead to emotional outbursts, intense conflict, or potential re-traumatization. A key theme, and this is actually something as a group we keep coming back to, is the importance of clocking imposter syndrome. So in some of the included studies, there was questions like, which hat am I speaking from? Who am I speaking for? Do I know enough to be part of research? And there was also some of the lived experience researchers talked about feeling isolated from other researchers. So in this study, Van Dijk, it was a study around poverty, and the learned experience researchers went out for lunch and the lived experience researchers couldn't afford to go out for lunch. So, just even thinking about the inequalities in the like day-to-day of the research process. Contractual differences reinforce hierarchies. So Greenfeld really explicitly talks about how lived experience researchers tend to be on contracts rather than salaries, and that creates an imbalance. Other aspects were a fear of the research impacting employment opportunities or formal support that you're involved with. And then in a handful of studies, there was this question of how to balance lived experience when you're known already as an academic researcher. So recognizing that these identities are blurred in many cases. Some strategies for dispelling imposter syndrome, the importance of validating expert by experience research platforms. So in Wright, a young person in their study said that they were nervous about coming into the research process, but their platform to speak was treated just as equally as the researcher's platform. So that was really like helped dispel any fear they had. And Dunn, we liked how they talked about offering a taster session so everyone could come along to see what it would be like to be involved in research before agreeing. And in a number of studies, there was opportunities to reflect on personal growth and new identities taken on in the research process. So in Dunn again, the young people started identifying as filmmakers as they went through the journey of creating a film. Another theme we identified is managing hopes and disappointments of the research. So Jack, I think you're going to talk about this, but the idea, like lived experience researchers come into these projects with high expectations that actually your research is going to make a change to something that you've identified as a really serious issue. And it can be exhilarating to be part of that difference. And sometimes you do see really direct impact of your research. So in songs, young people were speaking to like congressmen about their their study implications. And that engendered like a feeling of being part of something. But there are also some like potential disappointments or disempowering moments where, say your consciousness is raised about all the inequalities around, but then you don't feel like you can do much. And Eisenden point, like one of the comments there were that, like, in the face of this, it's important to celebrate the small achievements, recognizing that sometimes, some of these structural injustices are really hard to shift, but there are things you can do. And then in culture, I think they offer a really like intimate discussion about how disappointing it does feel when you've created a research context where you're promising legal change, and in their context it's young people who are domestic servants in poor working conditions, and then the policymakers say they'll look at your research and then they don't. But it's a really important thing, I think, overall, to think about what expectations people are coming in, what you can and what you can't do and achieve and promise. The next theme was about building and enabling relationships. Relationship building was mentioned in all included studies, but there were some interesting nuances. So recognizing the need to care for pre-existing networks that lived experience researchers are coming into the research, being involved already in community groups or cultural groups or existing research collaborations. So how can we bring these care networks like on board and along for the research journey? And second, importance of sharing the load with other experts by experience. So all the studies had there was none where it was just one lived experience. So the lowest number was like 2 experts by experience, and often responsibility for decisions were also shared with, say, advisory groups that also have lived experience represented. That seemed to be really important about sharing the load. Third, there was a mention about the key bridging researcher, so who was particularly responsible for the emotional needs and well-being of the lived experience researchers, although we don't really hear much about like who they are, what they're about. So that would be that's definitely a gap in the research, given actually they're playing such a like key point in the research. And then there's one recognition in Johnson, there needs to be suitable research infrastructure to support researchers who are then in these support roles to support lived experience researchers. Another theme was about creating a safe space. So again, widely mentioned, but often not like specifics offered. But some of the key specifics that were mentioned in some of the studies was the use of smaller groups where experts by experience could be together and kind of work together so in Peterson, they talk about how this offered us open space to voice needs and come up with possible solutions. So in their study with Swedish migrants about health inequalities, they then would like work together as a team, and then the next session they would come back to like the whole full group with lived experience researchers as well, but actually having the opportunity to build rapport and alliances and a network like within the smaller group seemed really important. Next, there was importance about personalizing the space, so immediately setting up these groups that recognize the needs of the lived experience researchers involved. Appel talked about having check-ins in between meetings or research activities so that you could constantly putting feedback, basically making sure that the research is evolving to continue to meet the emotional needs. And then allowing flexibility was also a key part of that, and that was discussed in many studies. And Jack, I don't know if you remember saying this, but I think you encapsulated this theme really well. Like, life's going to be lifing at you. So actually, you can't just have like a really rigid research context. And technology was discussed as often a way to help with flexibility, but actually not enough discussion about like how do you make your home space safe? Say you work from home as a lived experience researcher working on some really like sensitive topics. So we'd like to see a little bit more research on that. Then there was discussions around how do you create a safe space in the field where lived experience researchers are, say, collecting interviews. Debriefing was a key strategy in all studies that involved lived experience researchers going in the field. There was some mention, but not in all of these studies, around trauma-informed training. We particularly liked this quote from Owens, which involved people with criminal justice involvement, interviewing people who are currently imprisoned. And I like this where it says the facilitator used a more structured topic to give the peer researcher a sense of security and enable him to come in and queue at key points. So considering what the lived experience researcher needed to then feel secure in offering these interviews. Clinical supervision, again, we thought we'd see this more in all of the studies. It only was in studies where there was like direct, like in the field research. Van der Bremer makes a really interesting point, though, that you should be offering professional help, but respect wishes when it is not desired. So it's not necessarily something everyone wants. For our study, it was a non-negotiable. But yeah, just to recognize we need to be designing our research journeys around the needs of the group and the topic. And then finally, there was considerations about physical safety. Some of these studies do involve young people interviewing other young people who are currently experiencing quite dangerous situations. So there's some discussions there as well. And there's an importance of reciprocal safety. So I thought it would be important to put this quote out at length because it's to reflect that lived experience researchers feel safe also when participants feel safe. And often actually it's the responsibility of the lived experience researchers to ensure this safety for participants. So in Chamberlain, which is a study about Aboriginal parents who've experienced trauma, so definitely a sensitive topic. The team talks about specific strategies for fostering emotional and cultural safety. So in their study, they thought about ensuring a majority of Aboriginal participants, Aboriginal facilitators and presenters leading discussions, having training and preparation, providing information on participant roles and responsibilities in the workshop, providing information on managing triggers in the workshop, and then ways of managing distress, which included clay modelling, mindful
I was
colouring.
listening to this NIHR webinar about.
So I think someone maybe has come off. Oh yeah. Oh good. I love that. So thinking about like creative ways that they can manage distress in situ, like in the research. And this really resonated with us and with the next theme, which was about how can we also make this research on sensitive topics feel lighter. So this need for fun, joy, creativity was mentioned in a range of studies. And one of the studies, Marks, which included young people, and the young people said that it makes the research feel psychologically safe to use creative methods. It was also seen as a form of cultural sensitivity. Importance of like actually, so SONS recognises how you can be playful, rigorous, and authentic, and it helps enhance the analysis. And then research, participatory action research with young people, these studies recognised also about the importance of having fun through the process. Some ways you can embed that is thinking about how your downtime in the research processes is shaped. So it's not just about it always being about the formal things. It's also about like, say, like the coffee breaks, the lunch breaks around it, like how, that's all relevant to the emotional safety of the research too. And I'm just about coming to the end, but navigating endings was talked about in only a handful of studies, all the ones cited here. So, some projects had a formal evaluation, three of them. There was some ways of continuing research collaborations through co-authorship or dissemination, but studies mentioned that this was really contingent on funding and institutional support and wasn't always available. There was 2 mentions of like situations where lived experience researchers then decide to we've called it taper off involvement, which is so legitimate. I think we need to know a little bit more about how we make that process safe, so the research process is ongoing, that certain members, like for whatever reasons, don't feel like they can keep going. How do we make that safe? And then there was a little bit of a mention about bad taste endings in these 2 studies. So in Johnson, which is a palliative care study, they talk about how I felt a bit abandoned at the end, and Van Dijk talks about how some of the service users in their study felt fearful for their futures because actually their livelihood was tied to the salary they were getting from their research. So yeah, very real. Speaking to the camera was something we wanted to point out about the power of actually hearing from lived experience researchers in the studies. So 3 ways that studies collected lived experience researchers and recorded. So Van de Bremer did a collective ethnography, there was wide use of reflective diaries, and in Trevelyan, they co-authored the manuscript. And so you could see, places where you could see lived experience insights were in lay summaries, reflections at the end from lived experience researchers on their key take-homes of the findings, and then we really liked where Dunn had a pull-out box, which kind of was the lived experience researchers' reflections on the research process. So you could do it on like one key bit. Key caveats to this is that we need to consider confidentiality and representation, and also like where is the learned experience researchers' reflexivity in this? Yeah, a little bit more of that would also help, I think, highlight the reciprocal emotional labour that we're all involved in. So yeah, I'm going to pass over now to my lovely colleague Jack to reflect on our reflections of the systematic review.
Sweet, thanks Tessa. It's lovely to be here with you all today. I'll just give you a little bit of an intro into who I am. So I'm Jack. I was in care from the age of 4.5 until 18.5. I have experience of mental health systems, justice systems, and a few different other kind of like different systems related to my time in care. And I started doing research work from sort of the age of about 19, kind of on and off over the years, with different organisations. And I think the best one I've ever done has to be working with Cambridge. I've really enjoyed my time here, and I think they've made a really good example of what good co-production work looks like. So some of the kind of things that make Cambridge and again some of the other work I've done before stand out is focusing on some of the things that are on the slide. So for example, the benefits from research. So I think it's kind of like a 2-way relationship. So I've really had the chance to develop in things like my confidence, feeling like a legit team member and a legit researcher. And like people ask me what I do for a job now, and I say it with pride that I'm working with a university doing research instead of when I was younger, I used to be like, oh, I'm just helping out on this project, if you know what I mean. And I feel like Cambridge have invested so much in me that it makes me feel really proud to be a part of the work and kind of talk about it. But then I think there's benefits to the actual research itself. So, for example, with our unique lived experiences, we think about things in a different way to like kind of the traditional researcher. And as clever as you guys are, like I think sometimes unless you've lived through something, it's really hard to fully understand like certain things. So for example, when it comes to like gender and hospitals, when I was in hospital, there was only like 5 or 6 patients out of over 100 I lived with that were boys, and exploring the reasons as to why they didn't end up in hospital. And you might just see a number on a piece of paper as to why there's less boys or something, but I asked the questions at the time when I was in hospital, so I had the answers that were given to me by the system at the time, if that makes sense. It kind of like provides a different insight, and I think it's like really beneficial to the research. One criticism I do have though, is that I wish when we're doing co-production, because you guys have the legit paper qualifications, like your degrees and masters and PhDs and everything, if you can maybe invest in us to get some kind of formal qualification, because when I'm trying to reach out to other organizations to get like more opportunities, I haven't got a degree, so it kind of like makes me just look like a not as legit researcher as I actually am when you meet me. And then things like making a change. So my ambition when I was a kid was to be the Prime Minister. And I, every time I do a research thing, I'm like, this needs to be on the desk of the Prime Minister, and he should be doing a public statement the next day talking about the importance of our work. So I always feel a bit deflated when the Prime Minister isn't reading our work. So I think it's kind of like managing expectations and reminding co-producers that it's like chipping away at the system bit by bit with each piece of work you do, with each kind of co-authorship or piece of writing that you do or bit of research you do. Like, you've got to chip away at the system rather than like expect the Prime Minister to kind of be there and listening to you. And then things like valuing your expert by experiences and co-producers in the same way that you value your academic researchers in terms of like payment and what they kind of get out of it. So I've had people like ask me to do work before, and they've paid me in like Tesco's vouchers, and like as handy as that is sometimes, like a £10 Tesco's voucher, it's not going to pay my rent. Do you know what I mean? So like if you're able to, where possible, sometimes vouchers work for people who are on benefits, so don't like completely slate it off completely, but at least give them the like higher amount that you'd expect to get them paid in cash, if that makes sense, and make sure that they're being valued. I think that's really, really important to co-producers. And then when it comes to supporting the young co-producing people, I think Cambridge have done a really, really good job at supporting us. They've kind of given us wraparound support, like Tessa said, about how we took a bit of a break during some of the research because of kind of like dealing with the emotional labor that kind of comes in it. Like, it's not like, you know, like if you're working in Tesco's and you're stacking a shelf with beans, like you're not emotionally attached to the beans, you're not going to get triggered by the beans, like they're just beans. But it's kind of triggering sometimes for the co-production. So just kind of remembering that even for like you guys as legit academic researchers, like you're not a machine, do you know what I mean? Like, you've got emotions, you've got feelings and kind of stuff like that. So like make sure you take into consideration that the co-producers are human beings with emotions that might get triggered and stuff with the work, but done properly and well supported. Like, I think co-production works really, really well. I'm not sure how much time I've got left, so I'll just shut up now, basically.
No, that was incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, and also in questions, definitely, I imagine, direct them at Jack, because you've got such a wealth of experience in this space. Yeah, just quickly, next steps before we go to questions, because I'm so keen to hear from everyone. Yeah, we're going to be doing consultations now on guidelines that we want to have from the systematic review. So if anyone be interested in consulting around these, please get in touch, because we want these to be like, you know, really usable for lived experience researchers who are even considering being part of this, or research teams considering doing co-production. Yeah, we're going to write up the systematic review, so it's going to be available. And then Jack and I are going to do a YouTube video, so that will also be available widely. So yeah, awesome, that's us. But yeah, I'm going to stop sharing my screen so I can see yous. Yeah,
that was totally amazing. I'm sure everybody will agree. We've got a few questions in the chat. Shall I go through those first, and then we can open it up? So Catherine Arnold has said, how small is small, and any more guidance on debriefing technique? I don't know, Catherine's still on the call. I don't know.
Hi, yeah, so I guess in terms of the small groups of experts by experience you talked about, and yeah, any other sort of guidance on debriefing, it's something I'm really interested in, and also that, you know, debriefing doesn't have a negative effect, impacts of things. So
Yeah, should I go and then Jack, you go? Because so I think it's been interesting. It's also something we've got feedback from in grants that we've put in. I think in terms of small, like I think 3 is a good number. I think funders don't think that that's actually going to be particularly emotionally safe, and it puts so much responsibility on one person to feel like they have to speak for everything when like we know identities, experiences super complex. So yeah, I guess that's something I would think about. And also, there's a lot of really good work going on. So maybe seeing what kinds of like community groups are already doing this work and seeing how you can link in, I think yeah, I always think that that's a good thing rather than feeling like we have to reinvent everything. In terms of debriefing, Talia, our colleague, had a really interesting visceral reaction to that, actually. She's like, sometimes, some of the research where you're actually directly experiencing trauma, like either vicarious through notes or in the field, like it's probably not enough for it just to be the, say, academic researcher doing the debrief. Like we do need to have clinical support on hand, or that's at least our kind of view. Yeah, I'm not sure if I can give any like direct like debriefing strategies, but I think being readily available at the end of the phone immediately if anything happens, I think that is actually the key thing. But yeah, Jack, do you have any additional points on that?
Yeah, I think like in terms of like the debriefing and stuff, like setting the tone from the very start. So like kind of building that relationship with people so that you get to know them, you get to know their kind of like personalities when things might be going hard, because otherwise you're relying on them reaching out to you. Whereas if you know them really well, then you can check in with them, kind of notice different behaviors, whether like kind of they seem just quiet because they're stressed with work, or quiet because something's a bit triggering for them, and things like that. And also focusing on like building a team. So like instead of like day one being like, right, we're going to read all this research right now, like kind of getting to know each other, creating that atmosphere. Because like I know that I probably wouldn't have done so well in this project if I hadn't have had the support of the co-production team, like the other experts by experiences either. And being able to connect with them and feel comfortable around them and sharing my story with them is really, really key. And all the other expert by experience or co-production projects I've done in the past, when we feel looked after by our colleagues and the expert by experience team and kind of come together as a team, like it kind of takes the pressure off. And then if any problems do arise, like it feels more natural to kind of ask and accept help, if that makes sense.
Thanks, that's really handy.
A question from Julie Clark. I think she's still on the call. She's asking, how do you manage triggered behaviour that is not deemed desirable?
Do you want to go first, Tessa?
Yeah, do you have, well, it's an interesting question. I think part of it is like going into this research, you need to have a commitment that actually the research process is going to bring up things. And, we don't all respond in the way that, like I think that the word desirable there is quite interesting because, yeah, sometimes you actually just respond in a way when you're like, oh, on reflection, maybe I could have reined it in. But I think as a team, we try and hold that space. Yeah, I don't know. It's a hard one. That's why I think it's really nice to have what we call as like the backstage where, it's like the 5 of us working as a team to like
the backstage.
yeah, like so then you're not
I'm
having
sorry.
having like challenges of research, like we know how we're going to respond to something before it's, say, in a really public venue, which might be embarrassing, distressing. So I think there's something about that in terms of like mitigating. But also I think, so as a learned experience researcher in the space, like actually, like we know each other. I know what, I have a sense of what might be incredibly triggering. And so recognizing some things we don't go there, or some things need a lot of like preparation time easing in. So I think there's also responsibility on who's setting up the space. Yeah, and I don't think every topic is fair game, and I think that's important. Jack, what do you think?
Yeah, So I think like remembering that like everyone's human first, so like what might upset you might not upset like your neighbor down the road, you know what I mean? Like everyone's kind of got different levels of kind of tolerance of what they can and can't talk about. And just kind of like remembering that like our lived experience is a part of us, so like we can't always help when things might trigger us, and even though it may not be ideal for the research, like for example, I was part of this research thing for LGBT young people in care, and unrelated to the work, but I had a massive mental health breakdown, and the researchers didn't give up on me. They just kind of gave me the space I needed, and then when I got better, they welcomed me back into the team and didn't like kind of write me off or cut me out. Whereas I've had other like work opportunities that did kind of wash their hands of me when I was unwell, and that can be really, really painful because like we're all trying our best, you know what I mean? Like, and nobody asked to get kind of unwell with their mental health or anything like that. And just kind of remembering that, like, don't close that door, basically. Keep it like a two-way channel so that you can kind of like communicate with people. And if they are finding things triggering, whether it's in their personal life or the research, making sure that you kind of go above and beyond, you know, like it's not you like kind of the average person. Like I said, like the Tesco's thing, if you're working in Tesco's and like you kind of like drill everyone hard, don't you, like stack those shelves, do it quicker, like that kind of thing, like you wouldn't do that to an expert by experience or a co-producer, because everybody's kind of like dealing with their past at the same time as the research, if that makes sense, and kind of like making it all work, if that makes sense.
Yep, we've got another one, Rebecca McNaughton. I don't know if she's still on the call. She was asking, are teams that are doing co-production well? Oh, Rebecca's there. I don't know if you'd like to ask the question, Rebecca, yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. I like you, Jack, I'm a living experience contributor to research in Nottingham, and I always get my knickers in a twist around payments and benefits, and find that the general sort of standard form will say, be aware that there may be conflict. Goodbye. And I'm like, then, what am I supposed to do? And I've tried contacting NIHR in the past, and their response is, unless you've got a specific study that you can tell us about that you're involved in, we can't help either. So I think I just wondered if, you know, when it's done well, as it clearly is by you guys, is that inclusive of better stroke more information about X payment having a Y relationship with ESA or PIP or whatever it is?
So I currently get universal credit because I can't work full time because of my bipolar. So for me, like I was quite clued up on it anyway because I have like over the years kind of like learned a little bit about the benefit system. But I think what was most helpful is like kind of the setup of the payments, so like how we were invoicing, so I knew exactly how much I'd be getting like each time I was due a payment, and how much to declare on the benefits. Like in the past I've had people like where I've explained them on universal credit, so they've been like, oh, we can pay you in vouchers, and that sounds great until they tell you the vouchers are all £10 each and you're getting paid like 400, so you've got to claim all those codes, and then you go to buy something that's £400, and then Argos or whoever the vouchers are for are like, oh no, you can only spend 5 vouchers at a time. And you're like, oh, okay, so really I can buy like set number of £50 things, but I can't get the full benefit. Whereas if you gave me that £400 in cash, I could buy something for 400. So I try my best to kind of explain this to people, but it's always like as terrible it is, it always seems to be an afterthought in projects. Like when I've raised like kind of these things that they've already got the vouchers and they're all in £10 amounts and stuff like that. So I do think it's something that all organizations like over the years have kind of failed at. That seems to be the biggest thing. And although I have had some amazing ones where this one charity, for some reason, they had an agreement with the tax people where it was protected money, so it didn't affect your benefits. And I've never been able to find anything online about it because I tried to get it set up for a work that I was in. But genuinely, I was allowed to keep every single penny that I earned from this one project because of the agreement they had. So it definitely is possible. And I think it's really on the organizations to kind of explore these things from their finance offices and kind of work around. But because there's like limited information online, the average finance team isn't going to know all the little loopholes in kind of the benefit system. And really, we need reform over the benefit system, really. They're just trying to penalize you to take every single penny that you're kind of like earning, and you're just trapped in a life of poverty, really. So it is a bit stressful. Yeah, sorry, that's just my bit.
Thank you. Thanks, Jack.
We've got a comment from Ishant Aurora. I don't know if they're still on the call. They are saying, what?
Hello.
Yep.
Hi, Clara.
Hi.
Hi, I'm Nicole. Thanks very much for addressing the question. There are potentially a lot of questions, but we know we are limited by our time. But I think I'm working at University of Lincoln, so I am supporting a PPI project on allied healthcare professionals. We want to know people with lived experiences who have had experiences with the allied healthcare professionals in Lincolnshire hub. And I think one main challenge is around having a very strict contingent induction pack or onboarding documents. Now, I know people get scared when they see a 20 pack of documents getting into one email, and they don't want to read, probably they don't want to go through it. But at the same time, it's important to have basic documents in place for research governance. So I just want to understand, and this is open to everyone, that how important it is to have those basic documents in place for research ethics and governance with university's point of view, obviously. And how can we make that, I would say, easier and more streamlined?
Absolutely. I mean, it's really important. I think this kind of work also has a bit of a grey space where, there's not a requirement to get ethics application for lived experience researchers because, like, you're not participants. So there's something there. I really liked, I thought it was very good practice in the study by Dunn, where they acknowledged that, but still had a session where they sat down and they signed a consent form, and then they had a charter and outlined what the responsibilities and requirements of the research were. So it was like very much like from at least the study, it sounded like it was a very like discursive process where it also involved like an about me section. So then through that, then the young co-researchers could also share like what they will need from the research. So then it wasn't just a like top down, like this is what it is to be involved. There was a bit of like, okay, what do I need to also feel actively involved? So I do think you can actually make it quite an interactive session rather like, I know, yeah, I guess I also would be a little bit hesitant if you're just sending an email, like you don't know everyone's like literacy, like, I don't know, I have dyslexia. I find it incredibly hard if I'm just like sent like loads of forms to like even take in everything. So I think, yeah, just thinking like carefully, but I'm making it a conversation, I guess is what I would say. And maybe Jack, I feel like that's what we do a lot of.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
We've got another one from Laura Griffin. Laura's asking, do you have any thoughts for projects doing work with experts by experience on how we can get involved in research or writing up the work we are doing to have wider impact or greater reach?
Jack?
So, sorry, can you say the question again? I'm so sorry.
Of course I can, not a problem. It says, do you have any thoughts for projects doing work with experts by experience on how we can get involved in research or writing up the work we are doing to have wider impact or greater reach?
Okay, yeah. So I think definitely social media. I've heard a lot of like kind of opportunities through social media, but also your networks. So I know everyone hates to send out emails and like be like kind of like having a flood of inbox stuff, but most of my opportunities have come from networking, like in people I already know. So like back when I was 19, like I started some projects and then they've kind of like gone on more and more and more. So like it kind of like opened the door for me to get into more projects and they've all kind of like linked together. So for example, this Cambridge one, I wouldn't have got if I hadn't have worked with someone when I was 19 and I was like 26, 27 when I started this one. So quite a few years later. And then like kind of like when you're talking about publicizing and writing about all your stuff, like kind of findings and stuff, making sure that you think kind of like about your whole network as well. So like not just like your university like kind of LinkedIn and sharing it on there, like thinking about like kind of people you know, politicians, policymakers, like all these people to kind of connect with. I'm not sure if I've understood the question properly and I've just rambled about rubbish.
No, I think you have. I wondered if one of the outputs I'm most proud of from the coaches study was Jack's interview on what is it,
LBC.
LBC, which was a radio interview about our study with Dustin Hutchinson from that was organized by the National Children's Bureau. But like that's such a cool output, and that's not just for researchers, that's for like general. So yeah, also thinking about if you want to get involved with sharing your findings, like different avenues for that as well. Yeah, and we've had such a positive uptake from the media around our research. So like actually like people want to hear more from so yeah, I guess that's what I'd want to say.
And just to mention to everybody, I've put a link to Jack's website within the chat, Livestrong. If any of you can't find that or anything, just drop me an email and then I can pass the details on to you.
Thank you.
I think we need to draw the seminar to a close today. It's been absolutely fascinating and lots of discussion. So thank you everybody for taking part, and most importantly, thank you to Tessa and Jack.
Thank you very much for having us. I really appreciate it. And cheers for listening in, everybody.
Thank you. It's been great. Lovely to meet you.
Yeah, thank you, everyone.
Take care, everyone.